Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Khadija and I am with Rashma, which means Reaching All HIV Positive Muslims in America. We are a DC-based organization and our main goal is focusing on HIV and AIDS. So most recently, in 2016, we partnered with GW here in DC and created a toolkit for survivors and healthcare providers around FGM. So this work is very, very important to us. We learned so much about FGM during this time, and now we're trying to do more things to empower women and girls. And I want to introduce to you Angela and Mariah. They're really awesome people doing amazing things in regards to FGM prevention. So Angela, please tell people who you are and your organization and all your amazing work.
Thank you, Khadija, for inviting me and having me on. I'm Angela Peabody, and I'm with Global Woman Peace Foundation, which is located in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. We are a nonprofit organization.
Thank you. And what do you all do at the Global Foundation?
I'm sorry?
So what do you all do at your organization?
I didn't understand you.
So what do you do at your organization? What kind of work do you do?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
The mission of the organization is to empower women and girls through education and helping with the intention of eliminating gender-based violence, especially female genital mutilation and cutting, FGMC. And that's exactly what we do. We work with women who have survivors of FGMC, and we help to rehabilitate them, we counsel them, and we prevent it from happening to girls that are at risk of it.
Well, thank you for doing this very, very important work. Maria, can you tell us more about your organization and what you all do in your programs and about yourself as well?
Sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Maria, and I am a co-founder of an organization called SEO, which does a lot of work on breaking silence on the issue of female genital cutting or mutilation, particularly amongst Asian communities. We work with all communities, but we do highlight Asian communities because we recognize that they are often neglected or just underrepresented in terms of really understanding that FGC is a global issue and that it does affect people in over 92 countries. But my interest in this, or I've been working in the gender-based violence field for over 10 years, and I have a background in social work and in writing. And so SEO really utilizes the idea of creating programs based in storytelling so that communities can come together and can really find support and empowerment in sharing their stories in order to break the silence and create social change. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. I also am part of the U.S. Network to End FGMC Steering Committee. And then I do work in Massachusetts, which is my home state currently, around this issue of FGMC and trying to work on community education and outreach. And most recently, we passed a legislation in August 2020 to have Massachusetts become the 39th state in the US to have a law protecting girls from FGMC. So we're excited about that. It took 7 years, but we got it passed.
And speaking of laws, a lot of folks have asked us, hey, is FGM, is it illegal? Is it legal? And so can you talk more about the laws around FGM/C and what people should know about that?
Yeah, I can start. I know Angela definitely has a lot of information on this too. In terms of the laws specific to the US, it's a bit complicated. There are 39 states that have laws, and it's important that we have state and federal, and part of that is because they operate in different jurisdictions. We had a federal law that passed in 1996 that protected girls from female genital cutting/mutilation. Or I'm just going to say FGC, but it refers to the same thing. And that law, in 2017, I believe it was, there was a doctor for the first time who was charged for performing FGC in the United States amongst minor girls in Michigan. And so that law came into play. And when it was going through the courts, basically what happened was that a district court judge found that the law was passed by Congress unconstitutionally in terms of the suggestion that Congress had overreached their authority in passing it in connection to a commerce clause, which is, it's a little bit technical, but basically that means that they found that law was unconstitutional. Not all of it. There is a provision within that law that says relating to the idea of vacation cutting. So girls cannot be taken out of the country to get cut. That's still intact. And that's really important to recognize. But currently, the Congress has actually been working on improving that law and strengthening it. And so there was a more recent, stronger legislation that has passed the House. And I think it was just last month or the month before, maybe Angela, you can confirm. And now it's going to go on its way to the Senate, hopefully. So we are working to address that issue at the federal level too. And then at the state level, there are 11 states that still need legislation. Connecticut is one of them. Massachusetts is over states. Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm so in Connecticut.
Wow. Well, we're working on passing that legislation. And if you know anybody in Connecticut, Khadija, we might need to chat and see how we can get support there.
Yeah. I know a lot of people in Connecticut, so let's definitely talk more because it should be in all states for sure.
Because we're also trying to get a lot of community support for this and buy-in. So I would love to connect with you further about that.
Well, let's do it.
Also, great. Angela has a lot of information too around state laws that I'd love for her to talk about.
Yes, well, Maria, you did a great job explaining that federal law, because that's what's very complicated, the federal law. And like you said, the important thing is in 2013, the federal law was amended to include that vacation cutting, which is really important because people were taking the girls out of the country or even across across state lines just to have it done. And that was one of the things we pushed for our Virginia law when we passed it we amended our law in Virginia law in 2018. It was passed officially in 2017, but it was only passed as a misdemeanor. And we pushed to have it amended and upgraded to a class 2 felony, which we were successful in getting that passed. But we pushed to have that vacation cutting law, not only to take the girls out of the country, but also to take them across state line. If you just take them across to Maryland, for example, or to the district, you will be committing that crime and it will be a class 2 felony in the state of Virginia. So the laws, what is good, I mean, the positive side of things when it comes to the law that federal judge threw out in 2017 or 2018 is that it encouraged more states to pass state laws. Mm-hmm. And like Maria said, now we have, with Massachusetts passing this year, we now have 39 states that have passed laws, but we must encourage the other 11 states that are pending to pass their laws. I know I've done some work with the folks in Alabama trying to get there's been thing for a long time, and I went down there and I spoke at a couple of universities to encourage them to get their law passed. So it's really imperative that all 50 states get their laws passed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because people always think that FGC happens not here in the US. You say, it happens here? Are you serious? How does it happen here? It's like something that happens over there. And then there's so many different numbers that we have here, like 500,000 women girls at risk for FGC. And I know it varies per website that you go to. But can you talk more about how many women and girls are affected by FGC here in the US? Do you have specific numbers you want to share or stats? I know here in the DMV, I think it's over 50K that are at risk here. But do you have numbers for Massachusetts or other areas to show people that it does happen here? And people ask, well, how? Where does it happen here? Like Maria, you mentioned that in Michigan there was a doctor doing it there, so it happens right in Michigan. But where else is it happening? Do you guys have any more insight on that?
Sure. I could start if that's since you mentioned me, and I think that question of numbers is really important, and recognizing how many women and girls are affected is really important too. Having said that, we do have various figures at a national level. The CDC had a few years ago come out with the research suggesting that 500,000 women and girls were at risk in the US. And that was something that was very much, I think it was a threefold increase from the previous data, which was from I might be blanking on it, might have been from the 90s. But it's important to also recognize part of that was population growth, part of that was immigration patterns to the US from other countries that were considered high prevalence countries. And I think it's important to recognize that figure is most likely an underrepresentation of the true figure of number of women and girls affected. And because that CDC study also, again, it was based on an extrapolation of data from about 30 countries, mostly within Sub-Saharan in the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, which collected data, or UNICEF had collected data, what they call high-level prevalence data. As I mentioned earlier on, we do know that FGC or FGM occurs in 92 countries globally, and there was a report that came out recently by Equality Now, the US End FGMC network, and the European End FGMC network too, that highlighted that it did occur in 92 countries. So that means that all the other countries where women and girls have been affected by this are not included in that CDC 500,000 report. And the doctor that was found or charged with performing FGC in Michigan actually was born and educated in the US, but came from an Indian background. So that broke a lot of stereotypes around who this happens to as well. Mm-hmm. The CDC number also doesn't include the fact that there are groups from second generation, third generation communities where it's being practiced, including white Christian communities. And we've had survivors share their stories. Yep. And in the US and Europe, there was this history really up until the 1950s where FGC or clitoridectomies were practiced as a way to control women due to what they said, hysteria or mental illness or lesbianism. And that was something that, again, it's almost like that history has been forgotten. So that hasn't been included in that CDC study. And we've had women share their stories as well there. So I think it's important. We need those numbers and those figures, but we also, it's underrepresented in terms of how many women and girls are affected by this.
Thank you for breaking that down. That's really important perspective to think about as well when you view these numbers. So thank you for sharing that. Angela, do you want to add anything to that?
I just want to when people start talking about, oh, it happens only in Africa or in Africa and Asia and the Middle East, I like to tell this story that Maria has heard numerous times because I always share it, but I want to share it with the audience that it happens right here in Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. Because a few years ago, I did a presentation at my church, and after the presentation, a lady came to me and she said, it's happening right here in Virginia, in Springfield. And she said she and her daughter were standing in front of their townhouse one evening, and a 12-year-old girl came racing down the street screaming, somebody help me, my father wants to cut off my private parts. She said because she had attended a previous presentation I had done at the same church a couple of years before, she recognized exactly what the girl meant, and she and her daughter called the police. The father was chasing the girl with a big knife in his hand and ordering them to stay out of his way because it's his culture and he had to do it, but she got in his face and protected the girl until the police got there. So it just proves that, yes, it is happening here. It's not, we're not just exaggerating. It is happening here in the US.
Yeah, and with our work at Rahma too, we've met survivors from throughout the U.S. Who have shared, their stories, and it makes it very much more real. Like it's not their issue, it's our issue. It affects us here in the U.S. And speaking of this, what can we do to help prevent FGMC from happening here in the U.S.?
I'll let Angela start.
Education, educate, inform, like what we are doing right now, what the three of us are doing right now. That's what needs to be done. I really believe that. And Maria and her organization, they do a lot of that. They do it through storytelling. What we do at my organization, we educate, we go out. We have educated law enforcement, detectives, social workers. We have educated school nurses, school teachers, the communities. Like I mentioned earlier, I would go to churches and speak at churches. I haven't had the opportunity yet to go and speak at mosques, but I'm open to that. We have to educate the communities. We have to educate the law enforcers because they are the ones who, when they answer a call at a home that might have FGM, it might be FGMC happening there. They need to be able to identify the case head on as soon as they enter the home. We need social workers to know a lot about FGMC because they are on the front line, and of course school teachers, they spend more time with the girls than even their own parents do sometimes. School nurses, when those girls go to, if they're having pain in around the genitalia area, if they go to the school nurse, she should be able to identify why they're having that pain and not mistake it to be molestation or something like that. So it's really important for us to educate the community.
And you know what? Speaking of, you mentioned school nurse, and with Rahma, we partnered with UW, and we interviewed healthcare providers on their experiences with caring for survivors. And many of them, they didn't even know what to look for, or if they saw, they made like face like, "Oh, what is this?" And then this woman felt like they didn't feel comfortable there, like they felt like they were judged. One provider brought in like 8 different people, like students, to stare at the person, and like she's like, "What am I, a monkey at a circus?" So it's like they should have information. So we create this toolkit for providers to help them see and understand the different types of FGC or FGM, and be able to properly care for survivors and interview survivors as well. And they share with us what they want from healthcare providers. Like, we want to see this, this, and this, so we can make sure we feel safe, comfortable, and culturally competent. So mentioning the school nurse reminded me of that, and that's a really important aspect too. In our healthcare system, we spoke to actual students that are being trained, and they said they didn't have any classes on how to, understand, identify FGC, and they're trained to be doctors. So we definitely have a long way to go in regards to education, like you mentioned. So I wanted just to bring up that point.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree with everything with what both of you have said. And I think you're both highlighting this need that we really need to work in this multi-sectorial way to address this issue where we need everybody on board. So we need health professionals, social workers, we need civil society organizations, community-based, we need survivors, we need law enforcement, we need health professionals, everybody really to come together to really address this issue from different angles, because it is a complex issue too. So it isn't something that it has one strict solution, but I think we're recognizing that as well. And many organizations globally have been really recognizing that need to work together and collaborate on this issue. And I think that that's really promising and hopeful too. And I think particularly I think we do have to address the fact that we're living in this pandemic, and there is an impact on that, on girls being affected by FGMC as well too. And I think that we're trying to come together as a global community as well to address that and figure out how do we provide more support, funding, resources to be able to address the negative impact or the harmful impact that's occurring in terms of increases in numbers that we're seeing in certain countries too.
Yeah, I mean, with COVID, a lot of people are at home. And we're seeing in general, the rates of violence are skyrocketing in every types of violence. And it's like, what can we do to protect these girls? They're at home, we can't get to them, and there was people who might hurt them. I just wanted to say that there's some comments and questions here. And maybe bring stuff on the screen, and if you guys want to jump in and answer, please feel free to do so. One question is from, here, you can read this. This is in the USA. But international-wise, it's still happening in many countries. So I'm thinking they're probably talking about FGC that's happening in other countries. If not, you can clarify in the comments. But I think that's what their question is.
Yes, it does happen in other countries. It's happening, in case you're just tuning in, there was a report that came out recently by 3 organizations, authored it, Equality Now, the US End FGMC Network, and the European End FGM Network, that highlights that FGMC is happening in 92 countries globally. So it does happen globally, and it happens to girls and women from many different backgrounds, regardless of race, religion, educational background, economic status. That's kind of the reality of the situation.
And we have a comment here. It's a little long. Under the Constitution, we have separation of powers between the federal and state governments.
Oh, that's Joanne. She's part of the Massachusetts task force that helped pass the law. She was there at the very beginning.
Very cool. Okay, so let's take a moment to review. Thank you for your comment, Joanne, and the work that you're doing. I have a question from an MPH student from Houston. I'm an MPH student on the FGMC project. Why does every state have different laws pertaining to this?
Because, well, go ahead, Maria.
No, you started. You go first.
I was just going to say, because each state passes, because their laws were not passed unanimously, simultaneously. Their laws were passed individually. And as I mentioned earlier about the Virginia law, our law was passed in Virginia in 2017, for example, and 2018. And then Maria's Massachusetts law was just passed this year. So their laws cannot all be the same because they were passed at times.
I was going to say, if Joanne is a lawyer as well. So if you are still there and want to type, I was answering that page student's question. Oh, great. You were answering it.
Okay.
So it looks like Joanne is trying to answer the question, which is great to have a lawyer listening in. But also just what Angela mentioned, every state has different legislation from different, for different items, from everything from other forms of domestic violence, sexual assault, to your state taxes, things like that too. So there are different jurisdictions, but Joanne might be able to better articulate that. But again, we have a separation of state laws, and we have federal laws as well too.
Yes.
And
the HR 6100 law that Maria mentioned earlier, much earlier, that was passed. I think it passed the House already last month, or early this month, and now it's pending in the U.S. Senate. So that is the federal law, and that is really the HR 6100 is going to close all of those loopholes that were left there in the 1996 federal law, to make sure that the case that was thrown out of court in 2017 will not happen again. So that's HR 61. If you want to write to your senators, your U.S. senators, make sure you tell them, please pass HR 6100 in the Senate.
While waiting for Joanne, there's another question that maybe we can look at as well.
So I just understood what Joanne was saying. So she was answering. So her earlier comments.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So this is this comment here. It was the question, the answer to the student's question.
There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to this. I'm gonna read it again.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that, Joanne.
Thanks, Joanne.
And then she added one more question here saying, unfortunately, the Senate just adjourned to after the election. So you start calling regular senators and get them to pass the law before the end of this legislative session, HR 6100.
So that's in connection to the federal law that Angela was just speaking about.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Another question someone had was, can you please state what are the 11 states that do not have a law passed on that?
Yeah. I do know this. I'm just trying to remember.
I can think of, I mentioned Alabama earlier, and I know that Vermont, because I think the only two New England states that have passed laws are Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I don't think, and I know Maria is they're working on Connecticut at the moment. So Connecticut, Vermont, Maine is one that hasn't passed. They have been pending for a long time.
I can find this out for sure. 1 second.
Hey, can you think of any others?
Joanne's looking right now for the list, and I think so.
Well, you can count Hawaii and Alaska. So it's Hawaii, Alaska, Alabama, Vermont, Maine, Connecticut, and that's 6. I just cannot think of the others.
Mississippi is one of them.
Mississippi. Okay.
Mississippi.
New Mexico. Okay, I got it. So it's Washington, Montana, New Mexico, Nebraska, right, Mississippi, Alabama, Maine, Connecticut, and Indiana. Did I name 11?
Yeah, it was like 9. Right,
9.
I think.
And Hawaii, and Alaska. So those
Hawaii
2.
And Alaska, yes. I had forgotten about this Washington State. Theirs has been pending a long, long time. I spoke there years ago, and they still haven't passed their law.
And it looks like Washington, D.C. does not have.
No, they don't. But they are not considered a state, right?
Right, they're not. Yeah. So that's
but they do not have a law. They do not currently have a law.
So I know one of the main things with Amplify is empowering women and girls. I think so many times we're like focusing on the action of FGC and hearing from survivors and focusing on the emotional aspect of it. But how can we empower women and girls in regards to FGC prevention and to make noise and educate them? Like, what ways do you feel are good ways to empower them to back their bodies and their rights?
So say I'll.
No, I think she froze.
Yes.
Maria, if you hear us, you froze for a minute. So when you come back, we'll have to have you repeat. Well, while we're waiting, did you want to add anything? Oh, is that her? No.
No. Well, while we're waiting for Maria, I will just reiterate again with, if the girls are educated um, themselves, they are empowered. So they will become mothers in the future. Those are the future mothers. And they can make that decision and decide. Maria, it fell off completely. And they can make that decision themselves and decide not to have their girls cut. um, it's so important for them to know that, because even though a lot of the adults are still that went through FGMC are still having problems themselves, physical and psychological problems, they can still make that decision to go and have their girls cut. Oh, Maria is back. So I was filling in for you.
It shut down on me.
Oh, no.
But I have a backup laptop actually, so that works. What was the question?
No, we're just asking. So, like, how I know you've been focused a lot on like the action, the FGC, and people like you see the media, they amplify like the act and the emotion and survivors. But how can we also empower women and girls in education or prevention methods? How can we empower them around FGC prevention?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know at SAO we do a lot of work around the idea of storytelling, but also really working with the communities to be the ones who are sharing these stories and coming up with solutions as well. So we have various programs. Our whole theory of change is actually based on this idea that you have to create a critical mass of voices to shift harmful social norms. And we really recognize FGC as a harmful social norm that has been justified in all sorts of different ways by various communities, whether sometimes you hear the idea of culture or religion or tradition, or that it's done for sexual control of women. I've heard, ironically, it's done to increase sexual control of women too, not just decrease, for aesthetics and health, even though it has no health benefits, but we hear those as reasons. So I think it's important when you recognize that it's a social norm that has been justified in all these ways, to be able to counter that. You need to really work with the community to be able to share their stories, break this silence. And that's what we really do with all of our programming, is the idea of how do we get communities to talk about this? And that's one of the reasons that SAO started in the first place, is we wanted to break the silence that this happened in various communities. I come from a community that practices it, the Bora community. And so it was something that wasn't really recognized years ago, that it was as prevalent as it is within that community. And SAO did some research that found that we had 385 women who took part in research from this particular Bora community globally. And we found that 80% said they had been cut, but we also found that 81% said they didn't want it to continue to the next generation. And that was surprising for us, because we were like, well, if people don't want it to continue, then why is it continuing? And a large part of that was because people were not publicly talking about this. And it was, there's a social psychology term, pluralistic ignorance, which means basically you continue something because you think everybody else wants to continue it, but you might not privately want to. And that's what was happening, was that the community I'd grown up with, and this is something that you find in other communities where it's happening too, that you're brought up with this idea that you don't talk about it, or if it's a woman's issue, or it's private, or it's celebrated, and all those things keep you entrenched. So this occurs generation after generation. But if you actually start to talk about it, that's where change happens. So we do things like we have a 3-day digital storytelling workshop where people come together. Angela actually took part in it. And so it's survivors, but also community members and advocates come together, and they get to talk about their stories and how they've been impacted by this issue. And the idea is to give them agency over their voice. We have a blog where people share their stories anonymously or with their name, whatever their comfort level is. Then we do various photo campaigns, a lot of different types of advocacy. But the idea is really about creating that critical mass of voices, because that's where you see change, when people come together from those communities. Not just, you need allies too, that's important, but I think it's really important to have communities at the forefront too.
Yes, and to add, for example, I was talking about the education angle of it. In Liberia, where I come from, it's practiced there. And we targeted a school. We discovered a school in the middle of the community that really practices it at a high level. And we decided they had a lot of girls in the school. Many of the girls that are even already 8 and 12 have already gone through the Sunday bush, which is where the society bush, where they have it done to the girls in Liberia. And so we decided to start educating those girls. A lot of them, it only costs $60 a year for their tuition for that school. And so a lot of the girls had to drop out of school because their parents couldn't afford it. So what we did was we made a deal with the school. If we pay their tuition, then you can convince their parents not to take them into the Sunday bush. Let them stay in school and get an education, because once they drop out of school during that age where they between 5 to 15, they're going into the Sunday bush in Liberia. So we started paying tuition for these girls to keep them in school, because like I said, once they're educated, they will not want it for themselves if they haven't already gone through it, and they will not want it to happen to their daughters when they become mothers themselves. And I think that's how we can help to end it, because if one generation decides, I'm not going to have my girls cut, and that they pass that on from generation to generation, that's how we will eventually end it. But it's not going to happen all at once by 2030, like the UN wants us to end it by 2030. It will be a long way by 2030, but I think it's going to take a long time, many years, a few generations before we will see FGMC totally eradicated.
Can I add one thing to Angela, which she said? I completely agree with you, but also I think it's important. One of the things we recognize is sharing stories of change is really important. So meaning sharing the stories of families where they have given up the practice, or, a daughter who's been, she was spared the practice, or did families that broke that cycle. And really it's a cycle of violence that broke that cycle. That's so important, because sometimes it can seem very basic, but the idea that you don't have to follow it can be very novel. And I think that's one of the things we like to do too, is really share those stories as well, share stories of the girls that are not cut. And related to that, I know this was true of the community I grew up in, but this is also true of some other communities. Girls that are not cut sometimes keep it a secret, or they're told to keep it a secret, because they can be viewed negatively if that's found out. And breaking that silence, those girls breaking that silence is huge too. So trying to find those stories, those narratives, and really empowering them to share that they were not cut is just as important as having survivors share their stories of the impact that this causes too.
I fully agree with Maria. Even we should also highlight some of the cutters who cut. Yes, I've heard of a cutter who did it for many years. She cut all of her daughters, and then she decided she was also a midwife, and she went to deliver a baby at one point, and the mother had been cut by her. And the mother and the baby died because there were complications that she couldn't control, and that caused her to stop. She decided she was not going to do it anymore. a story like that we need to highlight, because it will encourage other cutters to want to stop what they are doing.
And, with Rahma, we are very new to FGC, and we're still learning about it at our organization. Like, as I mentioned before in the beginning of this conversation, we're mostly focused on HIV and AIDS. And people are like, how do you get FGC then? How's there an intersection between the two? Well, there is. There is actually an intersection. And one of the things we realize is that sometimes when girls are cut, the same instrument is used on multiple girls. And if someone is positive, they can transmit the virus that way to the next girl. And also is a form of gender-based violence. So we do focus on sexual health as well, and GBV. So all kind of comes in together into place. So one thing we're trying to do at Rahma is we're trying to start a fellowship to help empower women and girls. And we called it Noor, which means like light in Arabic, because girls are the light of this world. We are this world. And it stands for Now Obtaining Our Rights Fellowship. And the good thing is that if we raise the money for this, Maria and Angela, we hope to have them come part of this and help educate the fellows and provide information on laws and school and law enforcement and storytelling. Because like you said, if we educate them now, when they have their own children, God willing, they will hopefully stop the cycle to the practice. Or we also talk about how we can support survivors. Like, that's one thing we also talk about. How do we empower survivors? They already went through, getting cut. So what's next? How can we empower them? So talking about that as well can be things we can cover. And towards the end of this session, we'll play a short video about the fellowship and what we're trying to do with it. And hopefully you guys can support it as well. But we think it's important. FEC is becoming more and more of a topic that we're hearing about lately, but you need to have, like Comfort said, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, unfortunately. There still are girls being cut right here in the US or taken back home for vacation to visit their family and friends in a different country of origin, and they're cut while they're there. So, I think it's great we had this conversation, and someone else mentioned in the comments, it should be more than one time, an ongoing effort, and I completely agree. So hopefully there'll be more conversations as well around this topic. But yes, we have a lot to go, and hopefully those who are watching can also join in and educate themselves. Keep asking questions, because Maria and Angela, they're amazing. They have a lot of expertise in this topic. And while they're here, utilize them, ask them questions, and they can, God willing, answer those for you so we can work together to end FGC. And we have about 15 minutes left, so it'll be a great time to ask questions. But in the meantime, Maria and Angela, please, anything else you want to add that I didn't ask you about, I think is important for these viewers to know.
Go ahead, Maria, and then I'll follow.
Thank you. What do you think about this?
I need to think about it for a second. One thing I did want to mention on the topic of laws, that are states that do not have laws. One thing that I'm helping to support is, now that Massachusetts has a law, I'm trying to support those in Connecticut to pass the state law too. And a friend of mine, Zara Patwa, and myself started a Change.org petition to try to get support so that the legislature will introduce legislation in their new session. So it would be wonderful if folks could share that petition and sign, and maybe we can share the link to it.
Let me find it here. Here we are.
Yes. So it'd be great. We just launched that petition a week ago, and we have over 28,000 signatures. So that's fabulous. We would love to get more. And also, if anybody does have contacts in Connecticut, like Khadija, we definitely follow up on that. But if anybody has contacts or groups, please let me know about it, because we are trying to build really a wide coalition to show that there is support for this. That is, community-based as well, and that has support from the various sectors. So from health, from civil societies, survivor community-based, child protective service officers, law enforcement. Really, we really want to have a wide coalition.
And Maria had a question about that for Connecticut. has it gone to the House or Senate yet?
So they'll need to file a new bill in January when the new session starts. There have been previous attempts. However, they have not been successful for a whole wide range of reasons. And we're trying to strengthen this law and really make it coming from a community-based perspective versus, I think, some previous attempts of the law as well too. So we're hoping to introduce new legislation for the next session.
And also, I mentioned earlier about a toolkit that we've done with GW for survivors and healthcare providers. So I wanted to show that here as well for those who want to check it out and see what we did in that regard. So here's the link at the bottom of the screen here. And then we have some more comments that I will show on the screen so that we can see. So here's one. African Family Health Organization at Philadelphia working very hard to fight FGC, educating the communities impacted through workshops and support groups, especially women and teenagers. Teenagers who are born here and start to send messages through WhatsApp to family back home. That's a really smart way. So they're educating through WhatsApp. Very nice.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to mention, if anybody is looking for resources, the US End FGMC network is a good place to check out. So maybe we can share that link online. Have to find it, but they list various organizations throughout the US that are working on this issue. So if you are curious about if there are organizations in your area, that's a good place to start. And they have a list of resources there as well, including a link to the toolkit that Khadija was mentioning too.
Yes.
Very awesome. I'm going to post the link to that right now so people can see and visit the website, endfgmnetwork.org. Okay, let's see what we have in the comments. There's more. Marcia says, sorry, I have to be in and out. Thank you all for this important topic. Does your research show the extent to which the practice is ending as new generations come? May I already address this?
We haven't done it in our specific organization's research, but prior to the pandemic, there was research that had come out that showed that FGC was decreasing in a number of countries within Africa. However, with the pandemic, we are now hearing reports of it increasing, as we had talked about a little bit earlier on, unfortunately. So I'm not quite sure. I think we're all in new territory in terms of how to address that issue, but we were seeing it being reduced and abandoned. And we do hear stories all the time of families giving it up or girls not undergoing it. So I think it's really important to recognize that it might not seem like it, but change is happening too.
Like I said earlier, it's a slow process. But yes, as Maria said, before the pandemic, we did see a very small decline in certain countries in Africa. And it's because of the work that advocates are doing throughout the world against FGMC.
And we're asked to share the links here on Facebook. So I put 3 links here in FGM Network. I put the petition and the toolkit. Any other links you want us to share, let us know. We can put it in the comments as well. So you can have that. We'll also share all of our websites too in the comments so we can contact us. Actually, I'll do that now while waiting for other questions that might come through. So I'll start with Maria's organization.
And also, I wanted to say, if there are any men in the audience, we need men to get involved in this campaign against FGMC. We really do, because parts of the communities, the world, like where I come, the part of the world where I come from, they claim that they do it because of the men. They are doing it because they want to please the men. Usually the fathers don't even get involved, especially in West Africa. They don't. It's the women women, the mothers, the grandmothers, but they are doing it because they want their girls to be marriageable. Well, if men come out and speak out and say, no, I don't want, I've had young men say to me, I don't want to marry a cut woman. I want a woman who has not been cut. So if more men come out and speak out and say, I don't want a woman who's been cut, I prefer one who hasn't been cut, maybe that will help to stop it. Maybe they will listen to the men. So we need more men to get involved.
And speaking of men, I forgot to mention, when we were doing our toolkit, we found that the voices of men were missing. So now we're expanding our toolkit and we're interviewing men and faith leaders who are men and getting their feedback and their perspectives and what they have done to support survivors and how we can use the information to help other men to be educators, advocates to prevent FGC. So we hope to have that released sometime next year. But it'll be added to that same link at the FGM Toolkit for GW link. It'll be added there as part of our toolkit. So we definitely understand the importance of men being involved. And again, if there's men on this call, please get involved if you can. Many lives pretty much depend on it. So.
Yeah, I echo it. We tried to find stories from men as well, too. And it's amazing to see. I do feel like I'm hearing from more men than I ever did before. And I think in part that might be the work of a lot of organizations really addressing this issue and the recognition that men need to be part of the story and really helping to highlight this as a community issue as well. And I know we've had, I was just thinking, our Voices to End FGMC project, we had one male, we would love to get some more, but he shared a story about learning about FGC when he was on an internship in Uganda. And then he realized when he came home, and he was not from Uganda, but that his community practiced it and that his sister and his mom underwent it. And he didn't know that. And his story that he created was about talking to his sister about this issue and recognizing that maybe some of their distancing had been in part because of that issue. And it sort of having that conversation sort of helped bring them closer in a way. So you never know really how this issue impacts people and families. And so I think it is really important to really think about this as a community issue too.
So this comment says, Muslims for progressive values work with male faith leaders in Africa. Hard to find them here in the U.S. Let's connect. We found a few through our research, and they're really wanting to address this. We actually have an imam here in VA that really speaks about against FGC, has done trainings, and is from a country where it's really prevalent. We met somewhere along the way who were really interested in raising awareness about it and making noise about it, and because people go to their faith leaders for guidance, right, and support. And they're like role models for them. So if you find a faith leader like talking about it from the pulpit or the minibar, or doing it in their sermons or khutbahs, then it can help create change. This is our goal with the toolkit. So let's definitely connect. I know we're connected on Facebook anyway, Ani, so let's talk more about it. I think it's very, very important to have men involved, especially faith leaders. And speaking of faith, people often think that this is like a religious issue. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I know Maria and I have a lot to say about that, so I will go quickly since we have time limited. I know Catholics who have, based on our survivors that come to us in our support group, I have Catholics survivors whose parents were Catholics and it was done to them. Muslim survivors who it was done to them, but it has nothing to do with religion. And whenever I speak on this topic, I try to let people know that it predates, FGMC predates all the major religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. There's nothing in any of their holy books that say women are supposed to be circumcised. Not at all. So it's not a religious practice at all. Let's get that straight. It is a cultural thing, a tradition that has gone on for more than 5,000 years, but it has nothing to do with religion.
I'll just add, I agree with Angela. I think it is important to recognize that that is one of the reasons many people give for why it continues. And that's another reason why it's important to also work with religious leaders around the issue. And it's very much true that it predates the major Abrahamic religions in the world. There are certain communities, my community is one of them, that have other religious texts where it is written down that you have to perform it. But I think what's really important to recognize is that no religion should ever promote harm to a child. There shouldn't be a justification ever. And I think that there are, unfortunately, many religions in different parts of the world that do other harmful practices, where we hear about child marriage. We hear about communities within the US that don't allow their children to get access to medical care because it's against their religious belief. Those are harmful practices and they're connected to religion. It doesn't mean they're okay. Just because something is thought it's religious does not mean it's okay. So I think that the bottom line is we cannot promote harm to a child in the name of any religion. That's just
period.
Period. Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Well stated.
Wait to the point. Because, working in this field, people often try to attribute to religion, and especially my religion, Islam. I say it's a Muslim thing. And again, like you said, no religion should promote harm to a child, point blank, period. So I'm glad that we're having conversation, and we're also having faith leaders. We interview people of all faiths, and we interview Christians, we interview Buddhists, we interview Muslims. There are our 2-kid interviews. So it's a diverse range of people that we're talking to. And it's very important to know that it's not specific to religion, it's culture, like you said, Angela. So thank you for saying that. We have another comment here from Internet. At the African Cultural Alliance of North America in Philly, we conducted several focus groups with African men ages 18 to 70 years old. One finding from the group was men were reluctant to participate in addressing FGM due to being constantly judged as being the ones prolonging the practice. We got better results when we had a non-judgmental approach. Stigma.
Yeah. Stigma is a huge thing, and I definitely can see why if you use a non-judgmental approach would be important. We try to do that as well too, recognizing that is a challenge, as a barrier.
Maria said, at the end of the day, it's child abuse.
Absolutely, it is. I agree. And there was another, when we were talking earlier, there was another comment, I think from Comfort, and she said that Kenya is a good example of men campaigning against FGM. And I do know that, yes, the Kenyan men have really, especially from the tribe that, I think it's the Maasai tribe, they do not, FGM is very prevalent in their community, but the men have really come out and stood up against it. So.
Well, we'll wait for a couple more comments. In the meantime, I'm going to play the video that here's a comment. Please give a example of a non-judgmental approach.
Well, I think I could talk about for SEO. So, we really encourage dialogue and discussion. And I think it's hard. It's not an easy skill to obtain, but I think being open to having conversations, a simple thing is language you use. So for instance, if you're speaking with somebody, the terms that they use, if you use, for instance, female genital mutilation, maybe they'll know that, okay, you're coming from that certain angle. Maybe they use their own colloquial term, whatever that is. I think all communities have their local colloquial kind of term. The Bora communities use katna. Maybe that's the term you want to use. It can be something as simple as that, but sometimes engaging in dialogue over a long period of time, and Angela's so right about change takes time, is sometimes you're not going to convince or change somebody's mind necessarily in one instance or one conversation, particularly someone who is very, very much a proponent of this. But sometimes if you're having conversations over a period of time, that can sink in and that can be what changes. So being open to having those conversations is important. It's not easy to do. I'm not saying it's easy, but active listening is one of those skills you can use.
Okay, I'm going to play the video. I mentioned before, we're trying to do something where we're empowering women and girls instead of focusing on the act of FGC and, the violent act of it. It's more about empowerment. And we're trying to do something with Maria and Angela. We applied for a grant. Unfortunately, we didn't get it. So now we're taking things into our own hands to try to raise awareness and raise some funds to educate girls and women around FGC. So here's a little video put together by a couple people from Rahma's team. Hopefully you guys all like it and support the campaign. So I'll play it real quick. And while you're watching the video, if you have any questions or comments to still ask the panelists, please go ahead and put them in the comment area, and then we'll put it up on the screen. 1 second. Here's the video. Here is what Rahma is doing to help.
We've created a toolkit for survivors and healthcare providers.
Spoken at events amplifying the voices of women and girls.
Now we need your help.
We're launching the Now Obtaining Our Rights NOR Fellowship
to empower our women and girls.
We are a light in this world. It's time for us to take back our rights.
NOR Fellows will become advocates for change to end FGM.
Your donation will allow us to carry out this very important work and strive to make an impact in this world.
One girl at a time.
Learn more and donate today at launchgood.com/FGM. Okay, that's it. You guys probably saw someone in the video that's really vocal about FGC, has spoken on a lot of different panels, has made noise about it. She's amazing. She's one of our mentors. She's very inspiring. But a lot of times talking about it can also have an emotional impact. So remember when you're asking survivors to share their stories, talk about FGC, remember their mental health. Remember that it can take a toll, sharing a story over and over and over again. So try to think about it from an empowerment point. How can you empower survivors? How can you empower women and girls and focus on empowerment to end FGC? So hopefully together we can do that. I want to check and see any more comments before we get ready to close out. And we have one more from Antoinette, and she's saying dialogue and discussion and engaging just the men at one time. Oh, approach. This is an approach that you can do with men. That's not judgmental. It is difficult, and it started with first just hearing what is their understanding of the practice. FGM is wrong on all levels, and it has to end. Okay. Any more questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. In the comment, you'll see links to Sahil and to Global Women Heal Foundation and Rahma to contact us on your own if you need to. But thank you again so much, and see you next time.
Bye.